From New York, this is Democracy Now!
The official announcement is we're going to endorse our goals, what we're doing. That's what we're going to endorse. We're not going to endorse a candidate, a political candidate. We respect every single political candidate right now.
Ahead of Saturday's Nevada caucus, no Democratic presidential candidate will get the coveted endorsement of the Culinary Workers Union, which provides health care to attract members in the right-to-work state. We'll go to Las Vegas to speak with a labor reporter and a member of the Culinary Union who says, I have some of the best health insurance a union member can get, but I would trade it today for Medicare for All. Then a new Yale study in the medical journal Lancet shows Medicare for All will save Americans more than $450 billion and prevent 68,000 deaths every year.
A study was published by a group of epidemiologists from Yale University on Medicare for All. This is not Bernie Sanders. This is Yale scholars publishing in a prestigious medical journal. We calculate that a single-payer universal health care system is likely to lead to a 13% savings in national health care expenditure equivalent to more than $450 billion annually.
We'll speak with the lead author of the Lancet report. Then Latinx organization Mi Gente gives its first ever presidential endorsement.
This moment demands a historic mobilization. Our members agree that the best path to defeating Donald Trump is uniting with the movement to elect Bernie Sanders.
We'll speak with Executive Director of Mi Gente, Marissa Franco. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump falsely called himself the chief law enforcement officer of the United States Tuesday. This is Trump speaking about the Justice Department's abrupt decision to withdraw an earlier sentencing recommendation for Trump's close friend and former campaign advisor Roger Stone, who is found guilty of 7 counts of lying to Congress.
Just so you understand, I chose not to be involved. I'm allowed to be totally involved. I'm actually, I guess, the chief law enforcement officer of the country, but I've chosen not to be involved.
Trump's statement is not correct. The Attorney General is the United States top law enforcement officer, not the president. Trump's false claim comes as more than 2,000 former Justice Department officials have now called on Attorney General William Barr to resign after he intervened in Stone's sentencing. As a result, 4 federal prosecutors withdrew from the case, one resigning from his job entirely over Barr's actions. The Federal Judges Association is holding an emergency meeting today amidst the growing concerns about Trump's intervention in the Stone case and in the Justice Department overall. Roger Stone will be sentenced Thursday despite Trump demanding a new trial. President Trump issued a wave of pardons and commutations Tuesday to a group of his political allies, circumventing the normal Justice Department process. Among the 11 people granted clemency Tuesday were former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, who had been jailed for attempting to sell Barack Obama's U.S. Senate seat, former New York Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik, who was convicted of tax fraud and lying to officials, and investment banker Mike Milken, who was convicted of securities fraud and conspiracy and was best known as the junk bond king. The clemency comes amid speculation Trump might also try to pardon his longtime friend and former campaign advisor, Roger Stone. 6 Democratic presidential candidates will debate tonight in Nevada, only days before the state's caucus Saturday. Tonight's debate is the first time former New York City Mayor billionaire Michael Bloomberg will be on stage, although he's not on the ballot in Nevada. Heading into tonight's debate, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has surged to a large lead in a new national Washington Post ABC News poll, which now shows Sanders with 32% support, followed by former Vice President Joe Biden, who has only 16% support. Sanders has also doubled his support among black voters and is overwhelmingly the preferred candidate of voters under 50 years old. A separate poll by the Public Policy Institute of California shows Sanders with a considerable lead in California, with particularly favorable support among Latino voters. This is Sanders speaking in Reno, Nevada, Tuesday.
We're going to win this election not because we are buying the airwaves, as Mr. Bloomberg is. We're going to win this election because we are putting together the strongest grassroots movement that this country has ever seen.
Tonight's debate comes as a newly resurfaced video shows Mayor Bloomberg calling for cuts to Medicare and Social Security in an interview with CBS while he was New York City mayor.
There is a ways to slowly decrease the benefits or raise the eligibility age for Medicare and for Social Security. There's a ways to have more copay on Medicaid, which will do two things. One, the users of the service will pay a little more, but two, they'll think twice before they use services. So the services they use will be those that are really needed and not stuff that would be nice to have.
The resurfaced video of Bloomberg comes as a new study published in the medical journal Lancet finds Medicare for All will save Americans more than $450 billion and prevent 68,000 deaths every year. We'll have more on the Lancet study and Saturday's Nevada caucus after headlines. In China, the death toll from the coronavirus has surpassed 2,000 people, with more than 75,000 infected worldwide. Among the latest victims in China was the director of the Wuchang Hospital in Wuhan, who died after contracting the coronavirus. About 800 passengers of the quarantined cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, were allowed to disembark to Japan today. Thousands more remain trapped on the cruise ship, where over 600 people have tested positive for the virus. In Afghanistan, President Ashraf Ghani has been declared the winner of last year's presidential election after the results were delayed for 5 months. But Ghani's main opponent, Abdullah Abdullah, has also declared himself the winner and says he'll form a parallel government. The political chaos comes amidst breakthroughs in the peace negotiations between the U.S. and the Taliban, with a peace plan expected to be announced in the coming days. In Cameroon, the United Nations says at least 22 people were killed, including 14 children, in a massacre Friday and in the Anglophone region of the country. An opposition party has blamed the killings on the army, which the army's denied. The massacre comes amidst a conflict between the Cameroon army and English-speaking separatist fighters, which has killed thousands of people and has forced more than 500,000 civilians to flee their homes. Somali broadcast journalist Abdiwali Ali Hassan was shot and killed by gunmen near his home outside Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, earlier this week. He was a freelance correspondent for the London-based Universal TV, as well as a local radio station. No group has claimed responsibility for his assassination. And in North Carolina, an appeals court has temporarily blocked the state from using its voter identification law in elections after ruling the policy was enacted by the Republican-controlled state legislature in 2018 specifically to discriminate against African-American voters. The ruling is the latest battle over discriminatory voter ID laws in North Carolina. An earlier version of the state's voter ID laws was thrown out after a federal judge said the law targeted African Americans, quote, with almost surgical precision. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. We begin today's show in Nevada, where the third state presidential primary vote takes place on the Nevada caucus on Saturday. Early voting ended Tuesday, and polling stations reported long lines with more than 36,000 residents of the state opting to vote early. Amid growing fears the vote-counting debacle in the Iowa caucus could be repeated, the chair of the of the Nevada Democratic Party has said they will not be using the same vote reporting app or vendor and have developed backup reporting systems. Nevada is the first state in the West to cast its vote in the Democratic race for the presidential nomination, and also the first diverse state to be heard from so far. One of the state's most coveted endorsements is from the Culinary Workers Union, a division of Unite Here, which represents some 60,000 workers in the restaurant and hospitality industries in Las Vegas and Reno. Its membership is 54% Latinx. Last week, they decided not to endorse any of the candidates. This is Gioconda Arguello-Klein, Secretary-Treasurer of the Culinary Workers Union, speaking Thursday outside the union's headquarters in Las Vegas.
The official announcement is we're going to endorse our goals, what we're doing. That's what we're going to endorse. We're not going to endorse a candidate, a political candidate. We respect every single political candidate right now.
Nevada is a so-called right-to-work state, and the Culinary Workers Union has attracted members by offering them health care. It says it supports choices in health care. The mobilization of service employees could be critical to winning the Nevada caucuses, so the union's lack of endorsement for any candidate could be a setback for former Vice President Joe Biden and an opening for moderate candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar. The Culinary Workers Union also decided not to endorse a candidate in the 2016 race during the primaries between Sanders and Hillary Clinton. For more, we go to Las Vegas, where we're joined by two guests. Marcy Wills is with us. She's an activist, a waitress, a single parent who's been a member of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 in Nevada for 16 years. She wrote an essay for Common Dreams titled, "I have some of the best health insurance a union member can get, but I would trade it today for Medicare for All." Also with us, Hamilton Nolan, labor reporter for In These Times. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Hamilton, why don't you give us a lay of the land in Nevada, why the Culinary Workers Union is so significant, and the story of the health care they provide, and why they have chosen not to support Medicare for All?
Yeah, well, the Culinary Workers Union is one of the best unions in America, no doubt about it. They're about 60,000 members strong. They have successfully unionized the casino industry in Las Vegas, and they're really a role model for building power in a single industry for unions and for elevating people into the middle class who would not have otherwise been able to have middle class jobs. So they're a great union. They run their own healthcare center. Healthcare is a big benefit of being in the Culinary Workers Union. And I think that is the reality that's running up against the issue of Medicare for All in these primaries. And the idealism of Medicare for All that a lot of people in the Democratic Party and in the world of organized labor would like to see is running up against unions that do run their own health care and use that as a benefit to help attract workers, especially in a right-to-work state like Nevada, where it can be harder to attract and maintain members.
But, of course, Hamilton, that issue runs up against the reality that unless you're going to be a member of the Culinary Workers Union for life and never leave to go to another job, that you will have health insurance. But obviously, if you move to some other occupation, you face the reality that the health care that you get may not be, or the health insurance that you have may be far inferior. Do you know what the debate has been, your sense, within the union on this issue?
There definitely is a debate, and there's a debate not only within the Culinary Workers Union, but within the union world at large and within every major union in America right now. And progressives do want Medicare for All. And really, if you talk to a lot of people in the union world, if you talk to people who've negotiated union contracts, they'll tell you that if unions did not have to bargain over health care, they would have so much more political capital to use to make other gains for workers, wages, and things like that. So in a big picture sense, I think Medicare for All would be a great thing for unions and for organized labor. It's sort of this transition period where you have all these different unions that have their own healthcare plans that they have expended a lot of political capital on over the years, and they're extremely nervous about, I think, the bridge between what we have now and what Medicare for All would be. So it's going to require a leap of faith on behalf of the Culinary Workers Union and organized labor as a whole.
Marcy Wells, you're with Culinary Workers Union Local 226 in Nevada. You've been a proud union member for something like 16 years. Tell us your story. What kind of health care you have? Can you talk about how does the health care work? You go down to a union hall, you sign up for the health care at the beginning and join the union at the same time?
Absolutely. So specifically for the place that I work, it was being opened when everyone started, when I started. So it was automatically union. So signing up for the union gets you the health care. You do have to work 360 hours to qualify for the health care. So if you're just starting out as a steady extra or something along those lines, you have to meet minimum requirements. And then once you meet those requirements, you have to work 240 hours within a 2-month period, or you don't qualify. In that case, for each hour that you're short, you can pay $5 per hour to keep your insurance. So that's kind of how the insurance works. It's not exactly free. It costs labor. So for someone like me, I suffer with chronic illness. There are flares and there are moments when I can't work. And in addition to that, there are moments when I'm not able to get into the specialist I need to see in a timely manner. So I end up missing a lot of work, not qualifying for the insurance, and sort of not even having the resources from work to pay for that insurance. So for someone with chronic illnesses, it is not really the best insurance.
And when you do have full coverage, what are some of the co-pays or the requirements out of pocket for workers? Are there any?
Well, if you're going to the Culinary Health Center, there are not co-pays, but at the same time, there aren't any specialists there. So a person like me would still have to go outside of that location. It's $15 for a regular doctor visit, $20 to $30 per specialist visit. If I need an MRI, which I do frequently, it's $125 each time. An endoscopy is $150. So there are out-of-pocket costs, just like with any other private insurance, because that's what it is. It's private insurance.
So talk about the debate within your union about whether to endorse Medicare for All and how your coworkers feel.
Well, I wouldn't even say it's much of a debate as it relates to coworkers, especially for people that have been working in the industry for a long time. Locally, we have this sort of local lore about culinary union and good insurance, but there's also the idea of these golden handcuffs that sort of keep you tethered to an industry that you may not be physically or emotionally invested in anymore, and there's not really a way out. So the debate...
No, go ahead.
The debate is more centered around democracy and people feeling like their voices are not being heard by the union that represents them. You know, we're paying dues, and at the same time, Culinary has a political PAC that a lot of us donate money to. So it's kind of disheartening to get to this moment and see that we're not being heard, and we're also being intentionally or unintentionally misled. Because for everyone that is a person that looks like me in America, you're more likely to be uninsured than someone who is white or Asian. And that is not any different here in Nevada. So it's kind of sad to think that in Nevada, you will only be protected under the umbrella of the Culinary Union. We have friends and family here that aren't in the union, and, you know, it sort of projects this false image of elitism in a working class town.
And I wanted to ask you, the union in the past has mobilized members to participate in caucuses. If I'm not mistaken, some caucuses were even held on the grounds of some of the hotels. What's been the mobilization effort to get out members to vote, even if the union is not endorsing any candidate this time around?
It's the same as any political organization, because that side is more politically based. So there's our town halls at the union with each candidate. There are text messages and, you know, just reaching out to get members to participate in the process and to influence members on which way to vote as it relates to how a person could benefit the culinary union as a whole. So they sort of give an overview of good for union, bad for union, and then let the workers do the rest. And there are strip caucus locations for people that work day shifts, so you don't have to miss out or leave work. They're right inside the hotels, so that's very convenient. So yeah, I would say this time around, there's a lot of attention on caucusing and a lot of attention on Medicare for all. And the culinary's message is, we don't want Medicare for all. But membership message is, we want Medicare for all.
Marcy Wells, you wrote in your essay for Common Dreams that last November you attended a Bernie Sanders town hall held by the union in Las Vegas. And tell us what you saw.
Well, in general, it was great. Bernie was getting great reception from the crowd. And then when the question and answer portion happened, a little chaos erupted and people started heckling, chanting, union healthcare. And I did see people that were employed by the union, paid organizers, in the middle of those chants. In addition to that, the questions that were asked were not random. I don't think I would ever get an opportunity to stand up and ask a question because they're kind of staged, if you will. They're pre-selected, and the people that are going to ask them are also pre-selected.
So, Hamilton Nolan, can you talk about what the non-endorsement means? Who do you think ultimately lost here? I mean, of course, you have Bernie Sanders, who endorses Medicare for all, and then you have Vice President Biden, who also didn't get the endorsement and doesn't support Medicare for all.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there are a lot of competing theories out there, and I've heard a lot of competing theories and rumors about this. I mean, in one sense, Bernie Sanders did lose because he, I think, would make the argument that he is the candidate, the strongest candidate for organized labor, and so the fact that he didn't get the culinary workers endorsement, you could say, is a loss for him. On the other hand, there were rumors flying when last week, when the union put out the flyer that kind of dinged Bernie, everybody started talking about who they were going to endorse. Are they going to endorse Pete? Are they going to endorse Biden? Are they going to endorse Warren? Obviously, all those candidates who didn't win Iowa and New Hampshire would love to get that endorsement because it's seen as a real pathway to winning Nevada. And I think that the fact that the union didn't endorse anyone maybe a bit of a signal that they looked at the polls and thought about the fact that they don't want to endorse somebody in Nevada who doesn't win Nevada. Because if the union were to come out and endorse a candidate that didn't win, it makes the union look weak. And that did happen in 2008, I believe. They endorsed Obama, and he didn't win Nevada. That's not something that the culinary union wants to do. So a lot of people that I spoke to saw the non-endorsement as sort of a tacit acknowledgement that Bernie Sanders looking very strong in Nevada, and they decided to just stay out of it.
And Hamilton, the issue of that some of the leaders of the Culinary Workers Union raised about harassment and threats by Bernie Sanders supporters that they received afterward, do you get a sense that this is having any impact on how people will vote? I know Bernie Sanders did come out with a statement saying that that's not what his supporters should be doing, but he didn't really come down hard on his people and tell them to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the core issue that Bernie Sanders does not control everybody on Twitter. I mean, I've been writing on the internet for 10 years, and I can tell you that every time I write something or say something on the internet, there's 1,000 people who call me an idiot. And, you know, it happens on the internet. And the fact that people are saying mean things on Twitter, I think, is not necessarily an issue for the Bernie Sanders campaign per se. I mean, you saw Mike Bloomberg actually put out an attack ad recently, just pulling things that people had said on Twitter, mean things. So it's clear that campaigns are trying to make this an issue. But I think if we're being fair, you can't really hold a campaign responsible for something that random people are saying on Twitter.
I wanted to go to the issue of Mayor Bloomberg, but we're going to break and then come back to this discussion. We're speaking right now with Hamilton Nolan, who is a labor reporter within These Times, and Marcy Wells of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 in Nevada, where the caucus will take place on Saturday. Stay with us.
Because I always feel like running, not away, because there's no such place. Because if there was, I would have found it by now. Because it's easier to run, easier than staying and finding out you're the only one who didn't run. Because running will be the way your life and mine will be described, as in the long run, or as in having given someone a run for his money, or as in running out of time. Because running makes me look like everyone else, though I hope there will never be cause for that. Because I will be running in the other direction, not running for cover. Because if I knew where cover was, I would stay there and never have to run for it. Because the thing I fear cannot be escaped, eluded, avoided, hidden from, protected from, gotten away from, not without showing the fear as I see it now. Because closer, clearer, noser, nearer, because of you.
Running by Gil Scott-Heron, reimagined by Micaiah McCraven. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we continue to look at the race, particularly looking at Michael Bloomberg running for mayor in New York City. He equated a coveted endorsement from the United Federation of Teachers with the, quote, kiss of death. He went on to say in this, quote, I don't know what goes through voters' minds, but maybe they understand if the UFT wants it. It ain't good, and you don't want that person. We're staying with Hamilton Nolan, the In These Times labor reporter. Hamilton, can you talk about this larger union issue and the billionaire presidential candidate, Michael Bloomberg, who will take the stage in the debate, presidential primary debate, for the first time tonight in Las Vegas?
Yeah, it's really very striking having Bloomberg jump into the race. I mean, because coming into the 2020 race, I think you could make a really good argument that it was the most promising election year for organized labor in a long time. The president was weak. There was a big Democratic field, so unions had a lot of candidates to choose from. The presidential candidates all really competed very strongly for union endorsements. They all put out labor plans that are far more progressive than anything we've seen in recent U.S. history. So unions, I think, are well positioned, and now you have this mega billionaire jumping into the race, and Mike Bloomberg, as you pointed out, is not well liked by unions, especially in New York, unions that dealt with him when he was the mayor of New York. It's fair to say he is not a great friend of unions, not super popular with unions that have dealt with him. And so it's this wild card in the race, and it's almost like a cartoon battle now in the Democratic primary, especially if Bernie Sanders ends up being the leading candidate as he is now. If he keeps up with that and Bloomberg buys his way into the race, I mean, you really have such a strong contrast of visions for the Democratic Party and for organized labor between, you know, are people going to back the money, or are they going to back the socialist?
And Hamilton, in that vein, it wasn't just that he was in strong opposition to organized labor. I think many of the unions, when he left office, hadn't even been able to get a contract for up to 5 years because the mayor refused to grant them any. But he also, in a broader sense, he not only opposed $15 an hour for in the raise in the minimum wage. He opposed any raise in the minimum wage. He also opposed paid sick leave when it was passed in New York City. So many of the issues that go beyond just organized unions, but have an impact on working people in general. He's on the side that the Democratic Party has left, supposedly, because all of these issues now most of the Democratic Party candidates, presidential candidates, support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, remember, Mike Bloomberg was a Republican not that long ago. And I think at heart, Mike Bloomberg probably still is a Republican. And Mike Bloomberg's governing record in many areas, I mean, obviously he has issues like climate change and gun control that he touts that he's been progressive on. But in many areas, he governed like a Republican. And it's kind of shocking to see, you know, Mike Bloomberg decide to run for president and issue a press release and say, by the way, I was wrong about stop and frisk, for example, when he spent years and years and years defending this policy in New York when he was in control. So, again, I guess the analytical thing to say is it'll be a test of how credulous voters are when he says that he's changed his heart on all these various issues compared to what you look at his actual record is.
Hamilton Nolan, you've reported on the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers' announcement that it's endorsing Joe Biden for president. It was his biggest union endorsement campaign so far in this presidential campaign. Then nearly 1,300 IBEW members who support Bernie Sanders sent a letter to union membership asking them to retract that decision. The letter from the IBEW members for Bernie blasts the union's leadership for endorsing Biden without a vote of members and says in part, quote, "We're disappointed the International has instead thrown their weight behind the Biden campaign without member consultation," and says they support Sanders', quote, "transformative vision for expanding the labor movement, as well as the democracy and the solidarity that his campaign embodies." Talk about the significance of this and what you think will happen with the IBEW.
Yeah, I mean, there's really two issues here. The first is kind of the split between progressives and leftists within organized labor and moderates and centrists within organized labor, the establishment of organized labor. Joe Biden obviously has some stronger connections to what you would consider to be the moderate factions of organized labor. He was endorsed by the firefighters. He was endorsed by the iron workers and by the IBEW, which was his biggest endorsement, more than 700,000 members. And all these unions have factions within them that are far more progressive probably than the union leadership. And in the case of the IBEW, what you saw was these Bernie supporters within the union put together a letter with a huge amount, 1,300 names of union members. And the point that they made was not just that they want the union to endorse Bernie, which is not actually what they asked for. What they asked for was a vote of the members for the endorsement. And that's really the second issue, is union democracy. I mean, I think there's a fair argument to be made that a labor union making a political endorsement that is not based on a vote of the members is to a certain extent meaningless, because it really just means that the head of that labor union, that's their preferred candidate. You know, if you have a union like the IBEW with 700,000 to 800,000 members, and you haven't done a vote of the members, what does the endorsement really mean? So that's what you're seeing within the IBEW, and I can tell you that the very same thing is happening within other unions that have issued endorsements that the members don't like as well.
And finally, Marcy Wells, this is the first really diverse state that the primary and caucus is taking place in. The two of the whitest states, Iowa and New Hampshire, now done, and then it goes from Nevada, the caucus on Saturday, down to South Carolina. The significance of this.
The significance is it will be sort of a test of both the strategies that have been enacted by unions and everyone else, and sort of how much people have been paying attention as individuals. We need to start recognizing the policies that help diverse populations. And it's pretty clear that Medicare for All is one of those policies that would sort of represent the freedom that a lot of people have been looking for a long time.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Marcy Wells, member of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 in Nevada, very powerful union there. And thanks so much to Hamilton Nolan, labor reporter within these times, both speaking to us from Las Vegas, Nevada. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, as the Democratic presidential hopefuls prepare to take to the debate stage tonight, we turn to a central issue of the campaign, Medicare for All. In a new study, Yale scholars have found that Medicare for All will save Americans more than $450 billion and prevent 68,000 deaths every year. The study in The Lancet, one of the oldest and most prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals, found that Medicare for All, supported by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, will save money and is more cost-effective than Medicare for All who want it, a model supported by Pete Buttigieg. Sanders referenced the study at a campaign rally in Carson City, Nevada.
A study was published by a group of epidemiologists from Yale University on Medicare for All. This is not Bernie Sanders. This is Yale scholars publishing in a prestigious medical journal. This is what they said in that article, and I quote, "Taking into account both the cost of coverage expansion, in other words, on the Medicare for All, more people are starting going to get the health care they need, and the savings that would be achieved through the Medicare for All Act, we calculate that a single-payer universal health care system is likely to lead to a 13% savings in national health care expenditure equivalent to more than $450 billion annually. In other words, if we end the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies, and they made $100 billion in profits last year, if we end the absurdity of having thousands of different health care plans and the hundreds of billions it takes to administer these thousands of plans. All of you have had the experience of getting on the phone, arguing with some insurance company. You thought you were covered, and they're telling you you're paying for the other guy at the end of the line who's telling you you're not covered when you paid for it and you thought you were covered. We can save $500 billion a year by ending the administrative nightmare that currently exists in healthcare.
That was presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. For more, we go to New Haven, Connecticut, where we're joined by Allison Galvani, director of the Center for Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis at Yale School of Public Health. She's the lead author of the new medical journal Lancet study called Improving the Prognosis of Healthcare in the USA. Thanks so much for being with us, Allison. If you could start off by responding to the way in this country, we certainly see it in all of the debates, what the moderators ask, is Medicare for All going to increase taxes as opposed to the overall cost of health care? Lay out what you found.
Well, on the one hand, Medicare for All will increase taxes for households and employers. I think the important point is that overall it will reduce costs for both the taxpayer, households, as well as the employer, because it will eliminate the even higher costs of healthcare premiums paid by individuals and employers. It will also eliminate pharmaceutical prices, deductibles, co-pays, and all these other fees.
And in terms of Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden has said repeatedly that Medicare for All would cost more than the entire federal budget. Could you respond to that?
Well, we found that Medicare for All would save over $450 billion compared to what the country is paying now. So right now, the U.S. is paying more than any other country for health care, yet we don't even rank in the top 30 for some key public health measures, including infant mortality and overall life expectancy. And at the same time, there's over 80 million people without adequate health insurance, so either without any health insurance or without health insurance that they can afford. And the Medicare for All Act identifies a number of ways in which it's going to save the country money. So firstly, what people pay right now for hospital services doesn't correlate with their outcomes, their clinical outcomes, and it varies widely. So by applying Medicare rates to the entire country, that will save us $100 billion right there. Another important point is that Medicare for All will minimize paperwork and will streamline administration and billing. So currently, Medicare has an overhead of 2.2%, whereas private insurance is over 12%. So applying Medicare overhead to the entire country will save us $200 billion.
Let's go
Medicare for All will also... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to go to Democratic presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg speaking during the New Hampshire debate earlier this month. He said he supports Medicare for all who want it.
There is now a majority ready to act to make sure there is no such thing as an uninsured American and no such thing as an unaffordable prescription, just so long as we don't command people to accept a public plan if they don't want to. That's the idea of Medicare for all who want it. My point is what I am offering is campaigning for all of these things that America wants.
So that's Pete Buttigieg. Can you tell us what you found, if you understand what he means, Medicare for all who want it, and what that would cost?
Okay, sure. So while I just analyzed in detail Medicare for All, if we strip away the savings identified in Medicare for All and expanded health care through the Medicare for All who want it plan, we'd still have all these private entities and we'd be continuing the inefficiencies that makes our healthcare system so expensive. So on the one hand, I would support the offering healthcare to everyone in the country. That's paramount. On the other hand, Medicare for all who want it, it sounds good, but it's a very expensive way to achieve it rather than the single-payer plan that's being proposed in the Medicare for All Act.
And could you talk about your projection that about 68,000 unnecessary deaths per year would be avoided by going to Medicare for All? How did you get that calculation?
Sure. So people without health insurance, they tend to have mortality rates that are 40 times higher than people who have adequate health insurance. So we looked at the number of people in each age cohort who don't have health insurance, and we said, okay, if we can reduce their mortality rate to be in line with people that do have health insurance, then we would conservatively save 68,000. That's 68,000 compared to status quo. When we compare with access prior to the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, it's 107,000. And this is a conservative estimate in that we didn't even look at, we focused on the 40 million that have no health insurance. There's another 40 million or so in America that have inadequate health insurance and are forgoing health care that they need because of expensive copays and that sort of thing. So those people, the people with inadequate health insurance, would also receive full health insurance with Medicare for All. So the 68,000 is actually a very conservative estimate.
And what do you say to the candidates who say, you know, what you're hurting people who have health care when you switch them to Medicare for All, but of course you're helping people who are not insured who would then be overall insured?
Well, the premise of the first part of that statement, I think, is a pervasive misconception. People would have more choice. Everyone would have more choice because with Medicare for All, there would be no distinction between out-of-network and in-network barriers. So not only would you be able to keep your doctor, if there was a different doctor you preferred, you would be able to switch.
And what, Allison, surprised you most about this study that you did? What didn't you expect to find?
Well, The Affordable Care Act has already saved many people's lives. That's been quantified. So I was surprised that the Medicare for All Act could save almost double, and again, that's conservative, almost double as many people as have already been saved by the Affordable Care Act on top of the benefits that have been achieved by the Affordable Care Act.
And, of course, there are critics who say of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren's Medicare for All proposal that this is not possible in America, that this is in Denmark or Sweden. What's your response to that?
I think it's absolutely possible. In fact, Medicare system gives us a real-world test of viability. It succeeded for 54 years, so more than half a century. It has high popularity, bipartisan popularity. And if Medicare can succeed in the age cohort that is the elderly, 65 and above, who access health care most often, if it can succeed in that age cohort, is all the more feasible and cost-effective to be offered to everyone.
And what about the fact that most people in this country do not realize we are so alone in the industrialized world when it comes to providing health care for our population?
Oh, we absolutely are. Virtually every other industrialized country and many that are lower and middle-income countries offer universal health care. For instance, Costa Rica has a per capita GDP that's about 1/5 ours per capita, and they have universal health care. For the last 30 years, they have had a higher life expectancy than the U.S.
How have the campaigns responded to what you have to say? Certainly, Senator Sanders has repeatedly talked about this study. How has, for example, the Biden campaign and others?
I'm not aware of the response. There may have been a response, but I'm not aware of it.
And also, you've taken this step of making publicly available your calculations so that others who want to question or delve deeper into your analysis, where is that available?
That's available. So our tool's called Shift, and as you said, it's an open access, freely available tool in which users can adjust the parameters and tailor a financing plan. And that's available at shift.sidma, which is the Center for Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis.us. So I encourage members of the public, Congress, presidential candidates even, to try it out. You can adjust your assumptions. If there's a particular assumption you think is too optimistic, you're welcome to adjust it and see how you would finance it. There's many options. Go ahead.
And finally, Alison Galvani, if you can talk about being in academia, you're there at the Yale School for Public Health, the amount of money that goes into studies from the drug, the pharmaceutical, the insurance industry that skews what's looked at and what the results are. I mean, your study here is extremely significant and unusual.
Well, I'm not familiar with how much they're spending on studies to counter this. I do know, and it's publicly available, that lobbying and campaign financing it dwarfs the rest of the industry. So pharmaceutical companies are spending more than any other industry. And the second most is insurance companies. So fossil fuels, for instance, or banking, they're tiny fractions of how much are spent by those two industries.
Alison Galvani, we want to thank you so much for being with us, Director of the Center for Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis at Yale School of Public Health. We will link to your Lancet study titled Improving the Prognosis of Healthcare in the USA. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the Latinx group Magente endorses a candidate for the first time in its history. Stay with us.
Contra leyes racistas en Arizona, allá arriba, allá arriba. Allá arriba, allá arriba, allá arriba. Yo no soy de la migra. Yo no soy de la migra. Ni lo seré, ni lo seré, ni lo seré.
La Bamba Rebelde by Las Cafeteras. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
In its first ever presidential endorsement, the Latinx and Chicanx organization Mi Gente endorsed Bernie Sanders on Tuesday ahead of the Nevada caucuses. The group tweeted its decision saying, quote, "We know that in 2020, Trump's potential re-election is a life or death threat for us, for our people, and for our planet. This moment demands a historic mobilization. That's why Mi Gente is uniting with the movement to elect Bernie Sanders." A video accompanied the announcement.
This moment demands a historic mobilization. Our members agree that the best path to defeating Donald Trump is uniting with the movement to elect Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is the best candidate because
he will end the criminalization of our community.
Has been the candidate that really speaks to working class communities of all backgrounds.
He's the candidate with the best climate change proposal. He is the candidate who believes all, todito, student loan debt should be canceled. He is the candidate who believes in all of us having the right to vote, even those of us who are incarcerated.
Because we are realistic in the way that the system was set up and the way the system works. I do believe that shifting the administrations will definitely create a space where we can push for a higher quality of life for our gente.
Mi Gente is proud to endorse Bernie Sanders.
After the contests in Iowa and New Hampshire, where the electorate's overwhelmingly white, Nevada's the first election with a diverse population. Nevada's population nearly 30% Hispanic or Latino, 10% black. According to entrance polls, nearly one-third of voters in the Nevada Democratic caucuses in 2016 were either black or Latino. Well, for more, we're going back to Las Vegas, Nevada, where we're joined by Marissa Franco, who is the director of Mi Gente. We're going to go to her in 1 minute. But, Juan, you know, in your book, Harvest of Empire, you look at the population from Latin America coming north. And can you talk about Nevada's increasing Latino population and the power of its voting bloc?
The Latino population, of course, has been growing across the country, but especially in the Southwest and especially in states like Nevada, Arizona, Texas, California. And I think the key thing to understand about the Latino vote in general is that it has been much more involved in recent years. I've been updating my stuff in Harvest of Empire recently. For instance, in the 2018 congressional elections, there were 11.7 million Latinos that voted. That's almost double the number that voted in the previous midterm elections. So you're seeing an enormous surge in votes. And here's an interesting statistic that most people are not aware of. There are now more than 3 million Latino citizens who turned 18 since President Trump was elected. listen to that carefully. 3 million Latino citizens who turned 18 since President Trump was elected in 2016. That's an enormous potential group to register and vote that was not even eligible to vote back in 2016. So I think the important thing to understand is that the explosive growth of the Latino communities is going to continue for years to come, and this election, just as the 2018 election, is going to be a reflection of that.
Well, we are joining right now with Marisa Franco, director of Mi Gente, which has just given its first presidential endorsement. She is talking to us from Las Vegas, Nevada. Marisa Franco, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about your choice of Bernie Sanders and what was your membership offered? What was the vote?
So, buenos dias, good morning. We went through a process with our membership that included an analysis, interviews with the candidates, and an internal debate. We felt it was important as an organization and as a community not to sit in the sidelines in this 2020 election. And I think what the promise of the Sanders campaign is the idea that we would be electing someone who, we understand this as we're picking our target. We know that there's not one candidate who's going to come in and fix everything for us. But when it comes to consistency of message, Bernie Sanders is it. You don't have someone here who's, you look back 6 months or 9 months or this poll or that poll and the positions change. He has been fairly consistent. And we want a candidate and we want a president who's going to fight like hell, like we will. And that's what we intend to do, regardless of who ends in 2020.
And you had the choice of they could do Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders do a joint endorsement as well?
That's right. I mean, I think one of the great things about this primary is that I do believe we've had real options, and that's for progressives, for radicals, that's often not the case. Our membership essentially was choosing between 4 different political positions: a no endorsement, a standalone endorsement for Senator Sanders, a standalone endorsement for Senator Warren, or a dual endorsement.
Finally, as you fly out, when the corporate media talks about the lack of people of color endorsing Bernie Sanders, what is your response?
I think it's a bald-faced lie. I think when you look at the support for Senator Sanders, it cuts across race, it cuts across region, it cuts across class. And it cuts across generation. I think you see, particularly with young people, young people of all races, of all ethnicities are supporting Senator Sanders. He, I think, does have the ability to really bring together a working class, multiracial coalition that can take on Donald Trump. I think he gives the clearest alternative. Donald Trump, when he won, was saying something is wrong in this country. Here's why. It's this person's fault. It's that group's fault. It's this group's fault. Bernie Sanders, I think, gives the clearest alternative to that and gives an actual narrative and a solution that I think can speak to millions of people, and that's why we endorsed him.
Well, Marisa Franco, we want to thank you so much for being with us, director of Mi Gente. That does it for our show, but first...
Well, today we want to celebrate Democracy Now!'s 24th birthday. That's 24 years covering the movements changing America and the world.
A huge thank you to all the people who've made Democracy Now! Possible throughout the years, our staff and volunteers, and present the more than 1,500 public radio and television stations that carry us, and most of all, our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. Don't forget, you can keep up with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Roku. Thank you, everyone, for supporting News with a Heart, for helping us to go to where the silence is. Congratulations, Juan.
Congratulations,
Happy
Amy.
24.
Okay.
Well, that does it, and you can keep on joining Democracy Now! As we continue to grow. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for development manager position, news production fellowship, news producer as well. All of these positions right here in New York. You can go to democracynow.org. And tonight, I'll be at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I will be moderating a panel with Ronald Reagan's son, Ron Reagan Jr., with Arun Gandhi, the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, with Reverend Naomi Tutu, the daughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, as well as others. I hope people come out at 6 o'clock. That's at Purdue University. Go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Happy anniversary, everyone.